Welcome to China Manufacturing Decoded from Sofeast, the podcast where we take you through some of the major topics facing importers and manufacturers in China today.
Hi listener, welcome along to episode 52 of the podcast. Adrian from Sofeast here, and I'm joined by our CEO Renaud. Hi Renaud.
Hey, how are you doing? Hi.
Good, thank you. Thanks for being here. Today's topic, how to qualify a contract manufacturer or component supplier. So what I'm looking for today is some really great guidance on some of the best practices that everyone can follow.
Well, let's try to cover that in a simple way.
Great, okay. So I think the first question is really, when we're talking about qualifying manufacturers or suppliers, is who should actually be doing this? I've heard that, a lot of the time people are perhaps using sourcing agents. So is this a necessary step?
Well, a lot of people have, let's say if they don't consider themselves a professional buyer, it does make sense to think, hey, there are people, who sort of do that for a living. They can do a great job of orienting me to the right suppliers, and in some cases, yes, that's the case. That it really helps, and in other cases, it doesn't help. There are some perverse effects and unintended effects, I should say. But really, first, there are different kinds of sourcing agents. So I cannot put everybody in the same bag. Now, what you should probably not do is go on, Upwork or on LinkedIn or something like that and say, hey, I'm looking for a supplier of whatever, outdoor bamboo furniture. Or I'm saying, whatever comes to my mind here, or this kind of consumer electronics, or this electrical home appliance to use in the kitchen or something like that. Then a lot of people are going to say, oh, yeah, I can help you, even though they don't know much about the space. And they will say, okay, let me help you, let me do it. And in most cases, they will do the search for free. But if it's free, it's not going to be done very nicely. They're not going to give you the kind of deliverables that you might expect if you were paying. They don't really follow a very nice process. And then when they find somebody that they can talk to and they can have a relatively good contact and a good feel, they say, hey, okay, these guys, they seem good. I checked with them, they kind of checked all the boxes. It should be good. And how do they get paid? Usually they negotiate with the manufacturer to get, 5%, 10%. It's all over the place, so I can't really say what is the standard. We haven't done a study on that. It's not very easy to do, I guess. But they get their payment basically right after the supplier gets the payment, right? So their interest is to make sure business happens, even if the factory, that they found is bad. They want you to go ahead anyway. So there's kind of a conflict here between, the agent that represents you and your interest. And usually they will not tell you they get paid this way. They might double dip. They might also get 3% or 5% from your side. Then you thinking, oh yeah, I'll just pay her 3%. It's nice. But she gets an extra 10% at the back that actually you are also paying, because the supplier anyway is adding that in their quotations. They know that from the very start. If you go on, Alibaba, and you say, hey, I'm helping someone here. I'm helping a company. They're my client. They're looking for a supplier. Some salespeople will tell you, okay, so how much we add in the quotation for you? What is it? What do you want? 5%, 10%, 8%? So they're very used to it. It's a very, very normal process, I would say. So you got to be aware of that. Some companies will do it based on the process with some deliverables that they can promise to you. They get paid for the work, and then whether you do business with that supplier or not is up to you. They get paid anyway. This also has some, may have some downsides. You might say, well, maybe they're not very motivated to do a great job. Of course, nothing is perfect, right? But that's the way our supply chain management department does, and that's the way we like it, because at least we're not suspected of getting a payment from the back or anything like that.
Sure.
And
yeah, transparent.
And of course there is also it depends how can I say that, how experienced you are. But if they feel that you're not experienced, actually that so-called agent will work as an intermediary, will be a middleman, a trading company basically. They will say, okay, I can help you find the factory. Yeah, the factory, they're nice, Okay, here's what they do, here's what the quotation, here's the samples. And then you are never in contact with the factory. And then they say, well, their communication is not great, which might be true, by the way. They can speak English. Okay, that might be true, but these days, most factories that are mid-size and large, they do have people who speak good English. So it means it's a small factory. And small factory means, maybe not very organized and a bit risky. And then when you say, okay, well, I'm coming to China, I'm going to the factory, and they're like, it's not so simple, it's not very convenient to go there, blah, blah, blah. They want you to stay in your country, just send the money, and then they make whatever margin they want, basically. And again, the risk here is that even if things are not good, are they going to stop the shipment and tell you, oh, actually, this supplier sucks? No, because they are the supplier. I mean, and they want the business to keep rolling. So, of course, some of them tend to think more long term. Some of them tend to think more short term, and these are the most dangerous by far. And in general, they don't really want to bite the hand that feeds them, right? However, on the other hand, since especially the commissioned agents that get paid by the factory, who is their client? Who is really paying them is the factory. So they have to keep everybody happy. It's not like they defend the buyer. Sometimes actually, the importers, some of them told me, I don't understand. I have an agent, but it seems like she's always defending the supplier. Can you help me check if that's true? Go have a look, because I'm at the point where I can't really trust her anymore, because it seems like she's the salesperson of the factory, and that's the danger. That's what happens. So all of that to say, if you don't want to do it yourself, there are different options, right? The sourcing agent that will get a commission, the agent that actually becomes your trading company, and then service providers that will get paid based on the number of hours that they spend, or maybe it's a flat fee or whatever, but they get paid for the work, and they commit to some deliverables, and in that case you have much more transparency and much more freedom. It's really your suppliers. Obviously, the other option is to search for yourself, and we always tell our clients, especially when we feel that they have expectations that are a little bit out of line with the market, in terms of maybe pricing, in terms of minimum order quantity, in terms of the kind of customizations maybe that are possible for their quantity, their target order quantity. We tell them, hey, you know what, how about you go on globalsources.com and alibaba.com, talk with some of these suppliers, get a feel for what they consider standard, what is in their offer, and where they say okay and where they say no. Because, if we tell them, are they going to trust us? Maybe yes, maybe no. But when they get 5 suppliers in a row saying, "Oh, wait a minute, you want to buy mobile phones, but you just want to buy 500 pieces? Like our MOQ is 5,000
Yeah.
or more, you know?" Well, after a while, it kind of registers in their brain, and they're like, "Okay, well, it's not gonna fly. I got to
Mm.
change my model, change my approach, or not go ahead at all." So I think you should talk to some suppliers. You should, if possible, come to China. Well, obviously not 2020 or 2021, but when things get open,
Yeah.
you should, visit. You should get a feel for the place and for the people, and that's how you learn, and that's how you over time you gain experience and you make better decisions. So
Mm.
yes, you can do all of that yourself. You can find the suppliers directly, you can purchase directly from them, and then whenever you need, there's always service providers that will help you, maybe audit a factory, inspect a shipment, arrange the logistics, all these kinds of things. you
Sure.
um, you can find it. You can pay it, basically pay for what you consume, right? You don't need to have long-term contracts and commit to a retainer or anything like that.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So this is really following on from what we talked about last week, which is, large companies like Apple, maybe they've got team of foreigners or maybe local staff who work for them who go and do all of the, auditing or QC inspections and things like that, perhaps. But for a lot of smaller businesses, and you don't need to be small to be smaller than Apple, that's just simply not necessary.
Mm, yeah, absolutely.
Mm. Okay.
Um, so yeah, there's a number of different approaches. It also depends on how much time you have, because it does take time to follow up, um, to communicate and repeat and repeat and repeat, and follow
Mm.
up on the sampling and follow up on everything that's going on. Um, you know, but a lot of companies do things themselves because they want to learn and over time make better decisions. And I totally get it, and I totally support them.
Yeah, okay. Uh, Just a little bit earlier on, you were touching on the sort of sourcing process, mentioning things like going online to check out potential suppliers, and then maybe when you're ready to get a quotation from them and building up that information so you can proceed with a sort of realistic goal in view. Okay, so I suppose that takes us on to the next question, which really is to ask if there is a sort of template sourcing process that you're able to share. And I appreciate that that's not going to be in stone for every single importer because everyone's got their own unique requirements. But I mean, is there sort of a typical process that you can go
Well,
through?
you could say there are maybe two sort of templates that different kinds of buyers tend to follow. So
Mm,
if you buy standard off-the-shelf products, you want, I don't know, a coffee machine, and you just want to pick a coffee machine that already exists from a supplier already making it, and you just want it in your color with your logo. In that case, you source the product first, and then once you find some products that you like from maybe a couple of suppliers, then you talk about pricing right away, about the kind of customizations you want right away. You can feel how flexible and amenable the supplier is. And then you check a little bit on the supplier. It still makes sense if these guys are going to make productions for you to audit their facility, for example.
yeah.
Now, the the other process is more first qualify the supplier. Um, so that's when you develop your own product. Let's say you have your own intellectual property that you don't want to share to too many people,
Mm,
and it's a new product. It doesn't exist anyway. So you're not going after the product. You go after the supplier first. So you go after a supplier, of course, that has been making products in that space, right? So that you don't have to explain to them again from scratch. Okay, hey, you're gonna have to do he's gonna have to have the CE mark, and do you know about the certifications for low voltage, blah 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 blah. Okay, so you don't want them to reinvent the wheel. So they have to have some experience in the space again. Mm-hmm. But first and foremost, you're looking for the supplier that is, maybe the right size, that is already selling products to your market, that has an understanding maybe of the quality standard and the general expectations of companies like yours. You might look for manufacturers that have certain certifications. So these are two separate processes. In the first one, when you go product first, I want to find the product, and then I want to make sure that the people making it are not two guys in a garage. In that case, you talk about pricing very, very early in the process. It's part of the first questions to screen some of the suppliers out. In the second one, you qualify the supplier, in their manufacturing facility first, and then you start to disclose, little by little, you disclose some of the information about your product, but you don't disclose everything right away, because you might still be talking to 5 different suppliers. You don't want 5 different companies to have your CAD files and your Gerber files and so on, because they might leak it out or reuse it. The main risk is that they reuse it, obviously. So in that case, you go supplier first, you qualify the supplier, and then once you feel like you only have 1 or 2 in the running that you have qualified, then you disclose enough product information to get some pricing, right? Or maybe it's still too early, and maybe you need them also to do some of the engineering for the development. In some cases, that makes sense if they have a very specific competencies and experience in making a certain kind of product or module or subsystem. Or maybe it's not going to be all your product. It's going to be a blend of their intellectual property, because maybe you're going to reuse, I don't know, their camera module or something like that they already developed, together with the rest of your product, right? So all of that to say, these are the two approaches, and they are quite different. But what is common about them is that first you start to look far and wide on the market, and these days, since you cannot go to trade shows, it usually revolves around the e-commerce platforms, the data from the US Customs, for example, also to see where some of your competitors maybe are buying their products. There are different ways to search for potential candidates, let's say, and you gather some information about them, and ideally you have like a grid, an Excel spreadsheet where you collect all the information so you can compare them, and then you screen them out until you have a favorite one and maybe a backup one, right? This is when things go according to plan, and it's great. If you can have one that you check in depth and you feel pretty good about, and you have another one that you also feel good about but they're not as good, so you keep them as a backup. That's that's when things really work out great.
We've written about that before, the importance of keeping a backup, or even switching to suppliers, retaining one as a backup. So I will add some links to content about that in the show notes for everyone listening. Okay.
It's always remember, it's not all about keeping your costs down and making things very efficient. It's also about controlling your risks. That's just part of the cost, if you buy from China or Southeast Asia.
In fact, you just mentioned cost, and this is a really good point to look at in a little bit more detail, if you don't mind. So, when we are doing our sourcing, is focusing on lower and lower prices really the best strategy?
Well, in some cases, if the business can only be done at a pretty aggressive price point, then the buyers get to try to meet that price target. But in many cases, we we get involved in a project that's really going sideways, and at that point it's usually already too late, and because they've picked the wrong supplier. And we try to understand and we try to see, and the supplier keeps saying like, hey, for this price, what are you talking about? My other customers are very happy about what I sent to them, and they don't bother me like you, and blah blah blah. So you have a supplier that's used to doing very low cost kind of work and work with buyers that don't give that much importance to high quality on time deliveries and so on. Okay, and but the buyer really focused on the price when comparing the suppliers, but they actually do care about quality, on time delivery, and so on. Big conflict, and usually you gotta go back and find another supplier. And that's a typical mistake by first-time buyers. They think it's like shopping on Amazon or eBay. Oh, great! I'm so good at buying. I found one that's 10% or 20% cheaper than the others. Great. And when we see that, we run away because we're like, why are these guys 10 or 20% cheaper than the rest? What's wrong with them? Can be a good manufacturer, or what's wrong? And that's how they should think. But they don't. So since they don't have very clear criteria on how to screen the suppliers out, they tend to over focus on price. And oh yeah, this one is cheaper. And again, they think they're so much better than the others at buying, and oh yeah, I spent time looking, and then I found one that's really cheap. Must be the manufacturer, and all the other ones are middlemen. They all add 10 or 20%. Oh, I'm so good. I'm so glad I found a manufacturer. And that is not how a mature buyer tends to function. I remember more than 15 years ago when I was working in a trading company in Hong Kong, and actually our cheaper supplier of the cheapest product was an import and export company. It was a trading company, So you can just, how to say, theorize and make up your explanations, and it's usually not that simple. So what's going to happen if you pick the cheapest supplier? Maybe they haven't paid much attention to your specs, and then once it kicks in, they will push the price up. So that's a problem. But at least you know about it early in the process. The problem is sometimes they kick the price up 30% after you've wired the deposit, and then they don't want to send you the deposit back because, hey, we already bought the materials. That is not good. What else is going to happen? Quality, no understanding of your quality standard, and no control, no nothing, right? Maybe you work with a very small manufacturer. It's kind of learning their trade, very dangerous, very dangerous. That's where a lot of big disasters come from.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
sometimes it's the buyer that says, oh well, I'm gonna see how much I can push them. They tell me it's $5.5, and a lot of them give me something between 5 and 6. I'm gonna push. I'm gonna try to get $4. So to get $4, I'm gonna ask for 3.8. And then one of the suppliers is gonna be like, okay, okay, 3.9 we can do, and then oh great, I get it. I'm so good, I get the best price.
Mm-hmm.
And the guys at 3.9, it doesn't even know where is going to have it made, what material is going to use. It's like, well, 3.9, I can get this buyer. Okay, I'm going to hook them. That is a big risk.
Yeah, it's not going to be the best material, is it?
You bet. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Or maybe then you're under threat of your IP being abused, to try and claw back some money if they've started making your product. Who knows if they'll sell it to someone else?
Sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Usually the IP infringers don't need to be the cheapest to do that. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but yeah, it's not. That's not one of the highest risks usually.
Okay, good. And to stay on with IP, so when we are sourcing, I mean, you've mentioned being careful about giving out too much product IP and other business information too soon. So what sort of tips can we go through to protect IP when we're sourcing manufacturers or suppliers?
Well, as I mentioned before, if you have your own confidential IP about the product that you want to buy, do not send your designs, your files to 20 potential suppliers. I mean, you are leaking it out yourself, right? A very common mistake also that we see is that companies from, usually it's the US, because it seems like a lot of small buyers from the US are very insulated from the rest of the world, and they're used to doing business in their own way, and they're not, maybe they don't even have a passport, they don't even think of oh well, maybe this doesn't work over there. And so they use their NDA, that calls for enforcement in a court of law in Kansas City, right?
Yeah.
And Chinese suppliers are like, yeah, sure, I'm gonna sign that, no problem.
Oh, they'll love that.
Yeah, it's like nothing, because there's no way the American company can enforce it usually. So that's like a joke. You basically transmitting the signal, I don't know what I'm doing. So it's even more risky than thinking you have an NDA with them when actually you don't have an NDA. It sends the signal that you don't know what you're doing. And some suppliers will be patient and will actually tell you, usually my other buyers, blah, blah, blah. Most suppliers will be like, well, okay, again, one of these small guys, is any order going to come through? I don't know, because they don't know what they're doing. So, you already slip down in their list of priorities. And who's going to be very happy? The scammers. They're going to be like, oh yeah, these guys don't know what they're doing. Let's try to play a game here and get their money for nothing. So it's really something quite dangerous, I would say. So also an NDA is only about disclosure, but what if the company doesn't disclose your product IP, but they use it, they develop the product, and they sell the product? Or maybe they develop it for you, they sell it to you, but then after a while they're tired of you and they sell it directly to your big customer. What do you do about that? They did not disclose it, right? So it's not sufficient. It's not sufficient. You have to also target, cover some other cases such as using your product IP, circumventing you, and other common clauses like that. And if you're going to have them develop your product, you need a development agreement. I think we covered that in a previous episode of the podcast. And then if they're going
Yes.
to manufacture it, you need a manufacturing agreement, right? And sometimes the same agreement is both of them, all right?
Mm-hmm.
But some people come to us and their project is really at a standstill and they have big problems and the supplier doesn't care about them and is blocking them and blah blah blah. I mean, it gets to very nasty situations. And okay, what contract do you have? Oh, I have an NDA. Oh, okay. Well, this is not protecting you. Okay, so how to protect your IP? There's many ways to protect your IP. If you work with manufacturers that are ODM, original design manufacturer, that's right away, that's more dangerous because their business model is to actually make new designs and use it as their own product IP, product intellectual property, and sell it to other customers. I mean, that's their business model. When you want to buy toasters and you go in a showroom in Guangzhou, and you see these guys, they have 50 different models of toasters. They are the toaster specialists,
The kings.
Well, yeah. How many of these toasters were really designed by their own designers? Without input from any of their customers. Come on, So you go with someone like that and you tell them, well, I have an idea to improve this design that you have, and how, we would add this button here, we would add these logics and blah blah blah, and it would be a little bit different like that. And they're like, that is a great idea, and you're gonna help them and fund their development and help them sell it and get some experience about it, and they're gonna see that you are successful. Well, after that, what's going to happen? How about they cut you off and start to sell your product without you in the middle, right?
Yeah.
That is just too tempting. You make it too tempting.
Well, it's their design. This is a good point, because you've got to know when you're sourcing suppliers, you've got to know what sort of supplier you're dealing with.
Absolutely, yes, and we usually. And we covered that before in a previous episode.
Oh yeah, we'll definitely leave the link to that.
Yeah, there's ODM, as I mentioned, original design manufacturers. They have the design, they have something already, ready to go, and they might work with you to develop a new product that is based on one of their products. And it's definitely faster, but as I just mentioned, it's more dangerous because their whole business model is to offer products to other companies. And what are you to them? You are their distributor. You are not really a customer that can bang on the table. They can cut you off often, pretty easily, depending on the contract that you have with them, of course. But in most cases, they can kick you out anytime, and then it's very tempting for them to start selling your product somewhere else. Then there's the OEM, original equipment manufacturer. Actually, in some industries, that means actually the company that develops the products. But in this specific context, if you're sourcing consumer goods from Asia, OEM supplier means they can help you develop your product based on your design from scratch. And yeah, it's, depending on the contract, again, it's your product or it's their product. Be very careful with that. And they might subsidize, very often they will subsidize some of the engineering work, maybe the tooling or half the cost of the tooling, So it is tempting also. It does make sense for certain kinds of of orders and certain kinds of products.
Mm-hmm.
Now there's always a downside, right? The downside is that you don't pay for all of these things, so it means you don't own them. You don't own the information. So if you don't pay for the sourcing of the components, well, you might never know who makes the components. Now, if you negotiate that from the very beginning, there is some room to know at least the key components, where they come from. But a lot of people just forget to negotiate about that. So, and same thing, if you don't pay for example, you do like a rough sketch of the enclosure, and then they say, okay, we'll do the 3D CAD drawings and da 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 da, and and we'll design the tooling and we'll make the plastic injection mold. Great, but are they going to send you the files? Hey, you didn't pay for that, right? So when things don't go very well and you're very unhappy with them and you want to transfer production out of their facility, you have to do some of the work again because you don't have all this information in your hands. Always remember that.
The same would go for the molds as well, right? So
Yeah,
you might have to buy the molds again.
yes, and then in that case, usually the price of the mold is a little bit inflated. They say, well, it's not just making the mold, it's also designing the mold, and we did the DFM on the mold, and we did this and we did that, and we did these fixes on the mold because you were not happy about that. We did not invoice you for any of that, but if you want the molds, then you have to pay for all the service that went into making them. Oh, okay.
But
Right.
to be fair to these guys, they are, it's specialists in, let's say, product development, for example, and you have used their services. I think the problem, perhaps a lot of the time, is going to come from the communication from the beginning of the project.
Yes. Oh no, to be fair with them, if I were them, I would do the same because the
Yeah,
incentives, that's the incentives. I mean, if the buyer doesn't want to pay for that, it's not theirs, you know. Um, so that's the typical Chinese approach. Um, it's just, deep in the Chinese culture. There's something that guides people to do that, and it's the normal way to do business. And you know, and of course, not all Chinese suppliers do that, but it's really
right.
the standard way of doing things. The buyer doesn't pay for it. We don't even ask them if they want to pay. We assume they don't want to pay. So we do the work, we don't give them the information, and we will never give them the information.
Right.
Right.
But that's the
And
danger, though, that assumption.
yes, yes. And the buyer, a mature buyer, will be pretty direct about this with the supplier. If they say, you know what, we're gonna be like partners on this, and you're gonna subsidize this and this and this, and we're gonna do business together on that and that. Okay, that's fine. In some cases it works very well. But if the buyer doesn't want that, then they have to say, we are not going to work in the typical OEM way. You're going to work like a contract manufacturer. We will pay you for that work. And if you don't really want to do it, it's fine. The engineering design, the prototypes, um, um, picking the component suppliers and everything, that's fine. There are, design houses that do that, and supply chain management companies that do that, and that's fine. And we'll give you the stuff, and you will manage the tooling, but the contract will say very clearly that we can pull the tooling at any time. So, give us the quotation that that is based on that way of working,
Yeah.
right? And if it's very clear, and definitely a development and manufacturing agreement is a must if you do that, then I mean, why not? It's clear. There's no no misunderstandings here, I guess. The supplier knows exactly how it's going to happen, how the game is going to be played. So yeah, that's the way to do. So that's the after the ODM and the OEM that I introduced, that's the CM approach, contract manufacturing. Contract manufacturing is a term that's relatively common in the electronics industry. Not that common outside of it, but becoming more common as people sort of understand this better. And not everybody will understand it the same way. So again, have at least the business terms written into an agreement, and make it very, very clear every time you speak with a potential supplier, if that's the way you want to develop your new product.
Good. Okay. I mean, we've written about choosing the right sort of supplier. We've also written about manufacturing agreements, NNNs. We're not lawyers, though. Another good option is to check out China Law Blog. They've written about tons of this stuff. They are actually lawyers.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll.
Right. We're not lawyers, so don't listen to everything I say. As legal advice. This is not legal advice.
Right. But we do have some good content to share, so do check out the show notes, include some on that. Right. Okay, so finally, we're talking about contract manufacturers. Often you're going to use these guys to produce custom parts for yourself. So IP is definitely in play here. And so when sourcing a contract manufacturer for this purpose, what sort of tools and steps might you be following?
Oh, wow. Yeah, this can be an entire episode on its own, but okay. Basically, if you develop a new product, either you do it with your own team, or maybe you involve a design house, or you try to have 3 guys on Upwork, and then you need a technical a senior guy to coordinate everything, or you work with a manufacturer to do some of that engineering design. There's many ways to do it, but of course you need to make sure you always have the records of the latest files saved somewhere, so that someone disappears or someone starts to be uncooperative, at least you don't lose everything from the start, which is something we've seen a number of times. So be careful about that. As I mentioned, legal agreements, very important to confirm who owns the IP, even with your own employees and your consultants. You need to, if you go with a new product design, you need to do risk analysis on that. A very nice and formal way to do it is the FMEA, failure mode, modes and effects analysis on the design, and then later on the process. And as you start to design the process itself, at least have an idea about sort of with a block diagram with the flow of the materials and how they go through each process, and fabrication process, surface treatment process, assembly, packing, testing, what's going to happen. And based on that, again, you do a risk analysis all along these blocks, and you document it as in a control plan. That's a very very good thing. And then, you can go extremely deep into that. If the volumes are relatively large, you want to make sure that the measurement system, including the testing stations of the manufacturer, are aligned with yours, and that you confirm their accuracy with calibration and verification and things like that. You confirm the precision with gauge R&R. There's some specific tools. Usually quality technicians and metrologists can help you with. You need to obviously manage the ECRs, the engineering change requests, carefully. Otherwise, it can lead to a lot of issues. You can start to put some statistical process control in place. obviously, to do that, you have to pick which variables to control in priority, which ones are CTQ, critical to quality, how to measure them, what would be acceptable specification limits, and then maybe, for example, you can start to track the values and maybe calculate their CPK index. Okay, capability. It's a capability index, basically to confirm that most of them are going to be within the limits. There's a lot of things like that. One of the basic things, if we always go back to the basics, is the quality standard. What checklist, what testing protocol are you going to use, and what is the manufacturer going to use? And for cosmetic defects, approve a golden sample, approve some boundary samples, meaning maybe one a little bit darker, one a little bit lighter, or maybe one a little bit more red, one a little bit more gray, and okay, between these it's acceptable, but if it's worse than that, it's not acceptable, and then make sure everybody's aligned. The customer is aligned with the assembly factory, and then for the different parts, they have to be aligned with the manufacturers of these parts, right? So there's a lot of things that you can do. And to get back to the main topic of this episode, if you talk about some of these tools with the potential supplier, and they're like, what's the FMEA? What the heck is that? A control plan, gauge reproducibility and repeatability. What the heck is that? Then the kind of buyers that they do not tend to work with, right? It's always interesting to test their understanding a little bit, right?
Yeah, there is a lot to unpack there, actually. I think you're very right. We could possibly do a future podcast episode on that, because there's some really interesting stuff. And I think getting an understanding of that when you're going to that potential CM is really, really helpful. So as you mentioned, going back to the topic, when we're looking at qualifying CMs or component suppliers, that really does round out a lot of the best practices to follow. So thanks for going through those today.
Hey, thanks a lot. Thanks, Adrian.
Yeah, and to everybody listening, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.
Yep.
Thanks for joining us. If you've enjoyed today's podcast, don't forget to like and share, and you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all other places that you get your podcasts from. See you next time.